Scott Laughlin does a great job, SiriusXM radio host, talk a little NHL, covers the league, and kind enough to join me on a Tuesday. Scott, how you been, pal?
Doing well, Rich, yourself?
I'm doing really well. Good to touch base, and let's start with the Flyers in our backyard for a couple moments. Listen, I think they gave themselves much-needed padding with that 12-game point streak against bad teams. Now you got to worry about that brutal part of the Flyers schedule. And thus far, let's be honest, it's been ugly. 3 games against 2 teams that are ultimately trying to scratch and claw into the playoffs. You got Carolina, Florida, one against one of the better teams in Tampa, and they go 0-2-1. And I'm just wondering, you look at them in that stretch, they've allowed 15 goals in those 3 games. The mistakes are just haunting and killing this team. Injuries are mounting up a little bit. Are we starting to see a team that was reeling in November, or is this, in your estimation, just a bad stretch for them?
You know, I think, Rich, it's just a bad stretch for them right now. I think Mrazek's got to get back to being the guy that he was the first couple of starts. I mean, this has kind of been his MO, you know, through his time in Detroit, when they kept waiting and waiting and waiting for him to kind of seize the opportunity to steal the job away from Jimmy Howard and be a clear-cut number one. He would have these stretches where he would play well for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden his inconsistent play returned. And I think that he's part of the issue, let's face it. I also think the fact is, at times, you know, they're going with a number of young blue liners, as we all know, and they're kind of learning on the fly. And with learning on the fly, you get some sort of mistakes that pop up every so often as well. So I think it's all part and parcel with being a team that I think is on the cusp and is getting there. But at times you're going to see the inconsistency. And we've talked about it with this team, and you talked about the run that they had, positively speaking. We saw what the negative aspect was of it earlier this season with the 10-game winless streak that was going on, too. So I think what you get is you get a team that's still learning how to be consistently good. They've been too streaky, I think, for my liking and for Flyers fans' likings here the last couple of years, but I think they're trying to figure things out on the fly here. Not to say it's all Mrazek's issue as far as all the goals that they've given up, but he's certainly a big part of it right now, I think.
Yeah, and they make the move from Mrazek at the trade deadline. Were you surprised that, besides that, they really were a little quiet during the trade deadline?
Well, I mean, you guys have seen firsthand, of course, how patient Ron Hextall has been, you know, since he, you know, got back to Philadelphia a few seasons ago. And, you know, I think he deserves a lot of credit for not folding under the pressure of trying to go out and, you know, put a Band-Aid on a situation that I think doesn't really require a Band-Aid. What it requires is patience. I know fans don't want to hear that, you know, especially in a city where the team wants to win and wants to win a championship for the first time since 1975. But I think Ron Hextall has pushed all the right buttons since he's been there. I mean, he easily could have pulled the trigger and fired Dave Hextall earlier this season when they went 0-5-5. He stuck with the head coach. It started to pay off, and I think pay some dividends for the Philadelphia Flyers. So I think what he saw out there was, you know, the ability to perhaps make a deal here or there. I know Sanheim's name came up, and he was a guy that, you know, any teams were looking at, perhaps prying away from the Flyers organization. But again, to Ron Hextall's credit, he stood by his guns, and he basically said, I'm going to wait this thing out and be patient for these young blue liners because the next 2 or 3 years are going to be a lot of fun in Philadelphia, I believe.
You know, you actually bring up a really great point, because how many times do we see this in the NHL and the NBA where a coach gets fired a week or two in the season, and all of a sudden it's like a panic move? Sometimes you do have to stay the course, and we've seen this. Both those leagues, they're long seasons, so anything could happen. How about defensively, though? Because I go back to the weekend. I mean, they were a mess. Against the Lightning, you just had bad execution in their defensive zone. That was a problem going back to last Thursday's clunker against the Hurricanes. And against the Panthers, self-inflicted wounds. I mean, they could not contain those forwards. I mean, is this something that can get cleaned up over the next, say, 2 or 3 weeks?
I think it can, Rich. I mean, they've shown when they've played well and they play the right way, they play with a structured game, that they can actually be very, very effective. Now, again, goaltending's a big part of it, the last line of defense for sure. But it's all about the guys playing in front of the goaltender also in front of Mrazek at this point while they wait for one of the other 2 guys to get healthy. The reality is, too, as we know, you know, commitment to defense is not just, you know, the blue line core itself. I mean, it starts up front as well, and everybody's got to kind of be working in unison. You've heard it in football so much, right? When the front 4 or the front 3 is doing very, very well, obviously that kind of permeates down through the secondary and the linebacking core as well, too. So it's I think something that works as an entire unit. Right now, it's not been working for the Philadelphia Flyers, but as they showed earlier this season, it certainly can be rectified, even with some of the youth they have there in the back end.
Last one, then we'll move on from the Flyers. With Simmons coming back, how about the emergence of Nolan Patrick? I mean, you mentioned Dave Hextall, and again, maybe he's got some thinking to do here when you start to talk about your top power play unit. I mean, this kid, he just has a knack for not only being right around the net, but finding the puck and scoring some goals here.
Yeah, I mean, the question, as you guys know, Rich, has been, can he stay healthy? And hopefully all the injury issues are a thing of the past for him. And, I think he got that opportunity going back probably, 3 or 4 weeks ago now, and I think he's made the most of it. I think you're starting to see the kid kind of get it in every zone. He was a guy that came out of Brandon with the reputation of being a guy who can be defensively responsible aside from putting up the points. So I think, the emergence of Sean Couturier into a top-line centerman this season, and I think the emergence as the season's gone along, for Nolan Patrick to kind of fit into that number 2 hole, I think has worked out really well for Philadelphia. And look, this kid's just kind of scratching the surface as to how good he's going to be down the road. And like I said before, when it comes to defense and even when it comes to kids like Nolan Patrick, I think the future looks really bright at this point for the Philadelphia Flyers.
I thought we can bury the Rangers a couple of weeks ago. They make all these moves, trade deadline, right? They turn around Nash, gone, Holden, McDonough, and all of a sudden now, since that trade, they're 5 points behind Columbus for that second wildcard spot. Is that just, is it an aberration, or it's okay, you clean house and guys are maybe playing a little loose? What is it? How do you explain that?
Yeah, I think it's an aberration. It's 2 victories that Henrik Lundqvist posted last week. He had to make 50 stops in each of those games. So, I've touched on a couple of guys that Philadelphia's got in the back end that are still kind of learning the ropes at the NHL level. I think if you look at the Rangers' blue line core right now after the trade of Ryan McDonough and with some of the ineffectiveness and injuries that they've got, the Blue Shirts' blue line just looks like the Hartford Wolfpack's blue line, except they kind of forced it into the best league in the world a couple of weeks ago. So, I think it's an aberration. I think that Lundqvist having to do what he did just to get the 2 points in those 2 victories he got was just phenomenal. I just wonder, how long can he hold up here as a veteran goaltender, playing behind a very young blue line core. Georgiev played well in that victory at Edmonton on Saturday night as well, but when your goaltender's got to be the star of the show most nights, at some point, I think that dam is going to burst. And, I think the Rangers are making it interesting, and I'm sure that, collectively in that dressing room, they've kind of said to themselves, you know what, nobody's expecting much from us here down the stretch. Let's go out and galvanize, and let's surprise everybody. But I think reality sets in probably later on this week for New York.
Scott, when you look at arguably 2 of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, and certainly 1-2 in the Atlantic, Tampa Bay and Boston, would you give more of an edge to Tampa Bay overall? I know, first of all, these 2 teams, they're playing great hockey. They're very tough at home. They're winning a ton of games on the road, but Boston's taking a hit with the injury bug as well. But where do you give the edge between those teams? Kind of handicap those 2.
Well, I'll tell you what, Rich, I think, Boston, as you'd mentioned with the injury bug here, Charlie McAvoy missing for a month at least is really going to hurt their cause down the stretch. I think the Bruins are going to have enough to hold off the Toronto Maple Leafs for second in the division. But I think when you've got Tampa Bay, getting McDonough perhaps into their lineup as early as Thursday night, that bodes well for them. I think they're right now in the midst, in the early goings of an 8-game homestand, too, which is always apropos. I think at this time of the season where you can kind of just rest up and heal up a little bit and have the comfort and the consolation of playing all those games down at Amalie Arena. So I think deep down, I think Tampa Bay is going to win the Atlantic Division. I think they're being pushed a lot more than I thought they would be this season. I thought if they stayed healthy, they would win the division by at least 10 points. That's not been the case because Boston has been so good. So I think I still like down the stretch here. I like Boston to hold on for second spot, and I like them to host the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round of the playoffs in the middle of next month.
And you mentioned McAvoy. That injury's tough. You got a young kid, you got a rookie defense, and I didn't realize this. He's averaging about 23 minutes of ice time, which is second on the Bruins, I believe, to one of their defensemen. So he's, again, getting a ton of ice time and really skating well. Let me let you out on this. When you look at the NHL, and you've been coming to the NHL for what, close to 30 years now, Scott?
That's right, yep.
When you look at what's going on with the Vegas Golden Knights, is that, we saw that historic start from them, but when it's all said and done, will this be the best season ever from an expansion team in your eyes, or we still have to let it play out?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even if the season ended tomorrow, if they didn't win another game the rest of the way, Rich, I think this is the most phenomenal expansion season in the history of professional sports, not just the NHL. But I think in the history of pro sports, I think of the NFL, I think of what Jacksonville did, certainly with Tom Coughlin, very, very quickly out of the gate. Carolina Panthers did the same thing and had some out-of-the-gate success, and didn't take them too long to kind of build things up. But I think when you've got a team right now that's comfortably in first place in its division the rest of the way, that basically is setting records each and every night in terms of total victories, in terms of points, in terms of road victories, and things of that nature. I don't know that we're going to see this again. I mean, I think, Rich, the city that I feel the worst for is probably Seattle, because Seattle's going to come in and they're going to pay their $650 million to gain entry into the best hockey league in the world. And everyone's going to say, okay, General Manager X, whether that's Kenny Holland or whether that's John Ferguson Jr. or whomever might be running that show, well, go out and do what George McPhee did. Go out and do what Vegas did. Go make the playoffs in your first season. And by the way, compete for a Stanley Cup as well. It has been absolutely phenomenal. And then, Rich, when you think back to what they went through earlier this season, where they went 5 deep because of all the goaltending injuries that they picked up along the way, it is just phenomenal. I've been saying for a while, Rich, that somebody should write a book on the very first season of the Vegas Golden Knights, because it's a story that really is too hard to believe at this point.
It is funny in closing, because a lot of people, let's be honest, it was Vegas. Who cares? No one cares about Vegas and hockey, and they're not going. And then it's amazing what happens when you win. I mean, this isn't the $76 here, right? I mean, but once you start to win, all of a sudden fans start to pour in, and I mean, you talk about a home ice advantage with this team. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to get out there yet. Perhaps I might next season. But the reality is, you know what? It's a great atmosphere to watch a game, apparently, outside the arena at T-Mobile. The fans, of course, are worked up into a lather well in advance of the night's festivities as well. And, look, they've made it a fortress for them so far. I know they've had a couple of stumbles here on home ice the last week to 10 days or so. But they'll get rectified. And like I said, I mean, I'm not thinking that this team is going to go out and win the Stanley Cup, but then you say to yourselves, why not?
Yeah.
I mean, why could they not go out and win a round, having home ice and being so good at T-Mobile Arena? It'll be amazing to watch, to see if they'll punctuate this story a little bit further, perhaps by giving their fans a little bit of playoff success as well.
It should be interesting come playoff time. Scott, appreciate a couple moments. Keep up the great work, and hopefully when playoffs roll around, we can get you back on. Appreciate the insight, pal.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rich.
All right, you got it. Scott Laughlin, SiriusXM NHL.